It is Pegasus World Cup preview day out at Gulfstream Park this weekend on Saturday. So you'll have some stakes races and some horses trying to get a prep race in and then run for some bigger money next month. Let's head on out and meet the field for race number 8 on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. This one is the Janus, 5 furlongs on the turf. David, they could be flying in this race when you have horses like XY Speed, Yes I Am Free, That's Right, also really, really quick. And a couple of these very fast horses will be moving into the Brad Cox barn for the first time. So curious if we see any types of changes or any types of tactic changes at all when you have a couple speed horses. I'm expecting it to be a very honest pace in here, as usually the case, going 5 furlongs on the turf.
Yeah, speed is always dangerous in these 5 furlong races on the turf at Gulfstream. It's typically tough to come from really far back in these races, but there is so much speed signed on in this race that it does feel like it could be a difficult task to lead this field from gate to wire. Though, like you, I wonder what's going to happen with the 2 Brad Cox trainees, the number 5, Yes I Am Free, and the number 7, That's Right, who seem to have the same running style, and something's got to give now that they're both in the same barn. I wonder how that's going to work out, but regardless of any pace scenario, the horse to beat has to be considered the number 10, Arzak, who is just the clear class of the field.
No doubt about it. Arzak has not been disgraced in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint by some of the absolute best turf sprinters, and just overall body of work, extremely consistent, multiple graded stakes winner. Let's take a look at the Timeform US Pace Projector and see what they think. No surprise here with some of those horses that we mentioned. Yes, I Am Free. That's Right. Horse like Coppola has the ability to sit close, and with the outside draw, they may be forced a little bit to have to use some of that tactical speed early on.
Yeah, one thing I will say about these 2 Brad Cox trainees is that if it becomes the plan to be less aggressive with one of them, then suddenly this pace scenario does significantly change, because
Yep.
That's Right is probably a little bit quicker than a horse like Coppola, even though the pace projector shows something otherwise. That's Right is one of the fastest turf sprinters anywhere in the country for an opening quarter mile. And same thing for Yes I Am Free, but if one of them gets ridden to maybe sit second or third in the pocket, then suddenly I think it gives the advantage to the other horse. Hard to know exactly how that's going to play out, but it's something that I do think you need to be aware of in your handicapping.
Because the next tier of horses, like Coppola, doesn't have to go. Smithwick Spikes doesn't have to go. Those horses can sit just behind the leaders and be very content with that trip. So it'll be interesting to see how many of them are really pushing the pace early on. Let's get on out and meet the field for the Janus. We'll start with the number 1, Maceto. I thought this horse was a bit interesting in this spot. Just look at his overall body of work. He's had some long layoffs, and I think you can make some legitimate excuses for some of the only times he shows up with a poor performance. Couple things with him. I'm kind of curious what the price will be with him. How good has the fields he'd been facing in the company that he's defeated? And then obviously the trip, because he's probably going to be more of a deeper closer in this race from the rail, but could get the setup in here. David, what do you think about Maceto?
Yeah, I also found him to be a slightly tough read in this race because we haven't seen him very much over the past several seasons. As you said, he's got some very long layoffs in his past performances. And the fact that he's now putting 4 races together is something he hasn't done since his 2-year-old season. And he's a 5-year-old now. It does seem like he's come back in good form for trainer Mark Casse. He was very impressive from a visual standpoint off the layoff at Woodbine. And then last time he got the job done going the 5 furlongs at Churchill. My one issue with that race is that he took advantage of a total pace collapse. That was the rare race where the horses that were first, second, and third across the wire were 8th, 9th, and 10th in a 10-horse field in the early stages. So it was just a race that completely flip-flopped from a positional standpoint, and he took advantage of that. I wonder if that could be the case in a race like this, being at Gulfstream, where speed is so dangerous, but he is supposed to get some pace to close into.
The number 2, XY Speed, is a stakes winner at Laurel Park back in 2021. 14-time winner overall. Loves to win races. She was 5th in this race back in 2021 also. And when you talk about horses getting a trip or maybe falling into it, he really sat a very nice trip last time out. And he could be one of those horses who has some versatility down towards the inside. He might be able to carve out a trip just behind the leaders like he did last time out here. It's kind of got the better of Reef Runner, who was coming from a little bit farther back. What do you think about XY Speed's chances in this one?
I think you've got to respect this horse. He obviously loves the Gulfstream turf course, going this 5 furlong distance. He's actually won 4 in a row over this configuration at Gulfstream. The only 2 losses in his last 7 starts are the Select Stakes in the Woodford when he shipped to Keeneland and Monmouth, respectively. And it's not like he ran that badly in either of those races against some pretty tough company. So I think he's dangerous in here, and he's likely to fall into a good trip sitting in the pocket once again. I just agree with you. He was pretty fortunate last time, and I wonder if he's going to catch lightning in a bottle twice in a row, but I do view him as a contender.
Yeah, I think he's a nice pick 4, pick 5 horse to throw into some of your late exotics there. When I Get to Heaven was third on the synthetic last time out, gets back to turf where he's been better, but this does feel like the toughest field he's probably ever faced in his career.
Yeah, I feel like this is a slight step up in class from that handicap that he contested on the synthetic last time, though he did run pretty well in that race. It was a blanket finish across the wire. We'll take a look at the replay later when we get to Smithwick Spice. But When I Get to Heaven, it just has to run a little bit faster on the turf than he has previously. It's unclear if he's really better on the synth or the turf at this point in his career. Trainer Nolan Ramsey, a relatively new name in this sport, but has had some recent success at Gulfstream, is drawn well. So we'll see what kind of price he is.
The next one I think is a really nice fit in here. Reef Runner, who is lightly raced and just doesn't have very many bad performances. You can make a legit excuse for the race at Saratoga a couple starts back. Everything else on the page is pretty good. And he feels like one of those horses, David, that if they go fast early on, he should really benefit from it. And we saw him in the replay just a moment ago. It was just to the outside of XY Speed. He's at least right there as far as classes with that rival and probably some upside.
Yeah, he's another one that has to get a little bit faster, but I do think he has that upside because unlike a lot of these, he's a 3-year-old towards the end of his season. So this is when you would expect horses to reach their peak maturity. And it does seem like he's coming into this race off a career best performance when he just barely lost to XY Speed, who we already talked about as being a legitimate contender in this race. And Reef Runner was taking that good late shot at him at the end. I don't love the way that he refuses to change leads in the stretch. He's almost always hanging on his left lead all the way to the wire, but it hasn't really seemed to inhibit his closing kick. He's always finishing well in his races. So I think he fits this spot pretty well. I like the draw and the pace setup, and I think he's an interesting runner at what I believe will be a middling price.
Yes, I Am Free is a multiple graded stakes winner. He'll be making his first start now in the Brad Cox barn. He is really fast. He's a 13-time winner. Just recently, as now an 8-year-old that's a few days away from being a 9-year-old, seems like he may have lost a little bit of a step because he's been defeated recently by XY Speed and Reef Runner. Smithwick Spice has been in front of him. Coppola, he's going to have to turn the tables on a lot of rivals, David, who have recently outfinished him.
Yeah, I don't know what the story is, but this horse being switched to Brad Cox, it's the same owners that have had him for the last several years, taken away from Laura Cazares, who had so much success with this horse off the claim. And he's just been a stalwart of this division at Gulfstream for the past several seasons for that barn, just continually running well over this configuration. I don't know. I guess Brad Cox needs every stakes horse. So yes, they're all switching to the top few barns in the country. A worrying trend, but that's a topic for another time. Yes, I Am Free. I just wonder what kind of trip he's going to work out with that other Brad Cox trained speed to his outside, and the fact that he was able to get clear on the front end last time and still got run down by XY Speed and Reef Runner. Just feels like this could be a tough task for him at this stage of his career.
Next one, Okiro, who is a stakes winner on synthetic, not quite as fast as most of these early on, and maybe that'll benefit him if they go too quick early. I'm a little worried about 5 furlongs. Even though we've seen him get the 5 furlongs, he was put up in a race via DQ. I think it would have to really break well for him perfectly. And then from a class standpoint, I want to get a sense of how he fits with a group like this. This was one of the tougher reads in here for me with Okiro, the number 6. What do you think about him?
He's another 3-year-old at the end of the season that seems to be heading in the right direction, is coming off his career best performance when finishing that close third to Smithwick Spice and, right there in the dead heat with When I Get to Heaven, and we just talked about. Just feels like he would need that next step forward, and he's another one that has probably run a little better on the synthetic than he has on the turf in the last race, obviously on the all-weather. So he definitely has some things to prove in here, but he is a savvy Joseph runner that's going to be a big price, and you want to at least give a look to these types of horses.
Next up, it's the number 7. Let's take a look at That's Right, David. I almost went right past him when we were doing our preview, and we certainly can't go past him in this race because he might be one of the major speeds in here, and he is as you pointed out, one of the faster horses, I think, in training anywhere in that first quarter mile or so. He's a grade 3 winner. He's now going to be moving into the Brad Cox barn for the first time. And for us as handicappers, it makes it really challenging because both of these horses moving into the Brad Cox barn are really, really fast. They only seem to have one way to go. And so we have to kind of pick and choose which one's the quickest. Are they both going to go, or one going to sit? What do you think about That's Right in the trip he'll get in here?
Another horse that's coming off a series of losses, and I guess the remedy for that is to just give the horse to Brad Cox. We'll see if that works out for him. I will say I looked up some stats in DRF Formulator for Brad Cox in this situation with both Yes I Am Free and That's Right. First off, a trainer switch on the turf over the past 5 years, Brad is just 5 for 44 with an 11% win rate, $1.07 ROI. So not like he's tearing it up with these types of horses. Hard to read which one of these is going to get the more aggressive ride, if they're both just going to go gung-ho from the start. I will say That's Right is taking the blinkers off for this race. He's probably not a horse that even needs blinkers to show speed, so we'll see if that's able to dull any of his speed or get him to relax a little bit more. On his best day, he's pretty talented, and I think the flat 5 furlongs of this race is really going to suit him, especially at a place like Gulfstream Park, but a little tough to trust what kind of ride he's going to get and how this pace is going to work out.
Next up is Axthelm, who has won twice here over the Gulfstream Park turf course. He's a multiple graded stakes placed runner who comes off of a disappointing effort, though. Last time we saw him, David, he finished 7th at Belmont at Aqueduct in the Belmont turf sprint last time out. So where do we stack him up against this group?
It's troubling to me that his only 2 competitive races recently have both come at Kentucky Downs, which doesn't seem like it's the kind of track where the form is going to translate that well to the 5 furlongs at Gulfstream. Those 2 turf sprints couldn't be more different. And he's coming off a poor effort last time at Belmont, at Aqueduct. He has run well going the 5 at Gulfstream in the past, but it feels like he was just in slightly better form last winter. So I had trouble trusting him in this spot.
Smithwick Spice has won 2 of his last 3, one of them a synthetic sprint, another one a turf sprint. This group just feels like a lot tougher, but he's an 8-year-old who has 14 wins and 50 starts, so he really likes to win races. It's just going to be one of the tougher groups he's faced.
He is really game and tough to pass when he gets to the front end, and you see that trait right here in this all-weather race last time, a handicap affair where he beat a couple of rivals that he's meeting again in this spot, and it looks like he's going to get swallowed up at the top of the stretch, but he just clings to that lead all the way to the wire. Did something very similar when he won the Select Stakes at Monmouth in a big upset back in August of this year, but he is that horse that seems to run his best when he can get to the front end, and I just wonder if he's ever going to get a sniff of the lead in here with those 2 fast Brad Cox horses to his inside.
Our Zach is a multiple graded stakes winner. And when you just look at his floor, like the last 9 races, it's such a high floor compared to the rest of the field. He was only beat like a length and a half in the Breeders' Cup last time out. He is a multiple graded stakes winner. He's just classier than a lot of the field. But I will say, he's not one of those horses who has a lot of early speed, David. So he has to work a trip out. He probably has to get a little bit lucky as far as race shape is concerned, but he's one that they will all have to hold off late.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to take a short price on a horse with this profile coming out of the Breeders' Cup, where it seemed like his entire season was geared towards getting to the Breeders' Cup, and now he's coming back for his first race after that, kind of starting a winter campaign that feels like it's a little bit of an afterthought. So I wonder if we're going to see the A effort out of Arzak in this race. But as you were saying, even if, he comes up with his B or C effort, that might be good enough to beat this field because he's just so classy and he typically shows up and runs well in these races. I don't know how short a price I'd want to take on him, especially with Irad Ortiz riding in a big, confusing race. He kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. So he's probably a horse that is going to take a lot of money in here, but he's not one that I could leave out of any exotics wagers.
I've had a tough time over the last couple of years with Coppola. It feels like every time I was on Coppola would be the wrong day, and then the times I wouldn't be, Coppola would jump up with a huge performance. He is one of those types of horses who has a really high ceiling on a day when he gets a nice trip, and he can be forwardly placed. When you look at his recent running lines, he lost to a horse named Run Carson, who came back to finish second next out in the Holiday Cheer at Turfway, earned 100 buyer. And those races, while they weren't graded stakes races on paper, they were as good as graded stakes races last week at Turfway. They were really strong races. So I think he fits with this group pretty well. I would not be shocked to see him jump up and run a good race. He's certainly proven at Gulfstream Park. Just a wide trip out there might leave him not a lot of room for error here. Like everything will probably have to go really smoothly for him in this spot. Talk to us about Coppola.
Yeah, I do kind of feel watching his races like he does his best running when he's either forward or saving ground. And I wonder what kind of trip he's going to get here, as you were alluding to, breaking from the outside of all the other speed, probably getting hung three wide around the far turn, even if one of those speeds to his inside takes back. So I'm a little bit concerned about that and the ground loss. But as you said, he fits with this field based on class. He ran very well against that tough field, right in the teeth of a strong pace in the Woodford two-back. He's run well at Gulfstream Park in the past as well. Last winter, he put together a couple of victories against Aches Company in similar fields to this one. So I think he's a contender in this race. I just would want a decent price given the outside draw.
Foxtrot Anna will round out the field, and she's shown some speed recently, some early speed, but she's just not in, or he's just not in the best of form right now, David, this 5-year-old whose last win came going 5 furlongs on the turf over at Indy.
Yeah, cross-entered at Turfway Park this weekend. I wonder if this horse is going to show up here, given the fact that he drew the far outside post. I will say he was way against the race flow last time at Churchill. That was the race we talked about at the beginning of this preview with Macedo. That race completely fell apart, and he was one of the horses that forced it to do so. Just hard to find his race that makes him competitive in here.
Let's take a look at these selections, David. Hand the baton over to you first. You're going to put Reef Runner on top.
Just trying to find a decent price in this race with a horse that I think is going to work out the right kind of trip. And Reef Rudder seems to fit that bill. Like I was saying, has to take another slight step forward, but being a 3-year-old now in December, I think he's got a right to do so. And he's drawn well for this trip that I'm projecting.
Yeah, I use Macedo as kind of a new face here, hoping he can save all the ground and then launch a late rally there. I do think Arzak is the horse to beat. I have your horse Reef Runner as a real solid fit in this group. And then I'll round things out to the outside with Coppola. Maybe suffers a little bit from that outside drop. Still probably fits pretty well with this group. So 110, 411 for me, 410, 7-2 for David. However you're playing them in the Janus on Saturday at Gulfstream Park, we wish you the best of luck.